Welcome to the ExEm podcast. Here's your host, my dad.
Well, welcome back to the ExEm podcast. So this is going to be our last episode of season 2, and we're so excited to wrap this up in the way that we're going to do it. And I gave you a little bit of a sneak peek of our new intro. Many of you don't know this, but my wife is actually the voice of season 2's intro, and now my daughter is obviously on season 3. So I'm excited to have this conversation, and my guest on the podcast for the last episode of season 2 of the ExEm podcast is my wife. And so we are actually here in person, and we're not doing Zoom because we live in the same home, and I'm super excited to have a conversation. We're going to kind of share a little bit about our story, so say hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm Amy.
Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
Amy Marie Knabe. I almost said your maiden name. Yeah, we are actually legally married, so that's good. So what we wanted to do is have a little bit of a conversation around our journey. We'll talk a little bit maybe about how we met when we were kids, and then our journey kind of back together. And then over the last, almost 7 years, we've been going through a lot as a married couple, and I won't get too much into it now, but why don't you share a little bit about how we met?
So we met in high school. I was 15 and you were 16. And well, you tell the story better than I do because it's embarrassing for you and not for me.
Yeah. Well, we've shared our story quite a bit.
Yeah.
I was in a group called CATS, which stood for Concerned About Teen Sexuality. Super cool group that went from high school to high school, and I sang songs about abstinence. And I'll never forget the morning I was at Talmadge High School, and we were at a health class, and my buddy Josh and I were about to start singing our songs, and lo and behold, this beautiful redhead comes walking into the health classroom, and I began to get real nervous about singing these silly songs. And both of you and I were really involved in an organization called Young Life.
Yep, Young Life.
And it just so happened that I was playing guitar that night at your health teacher's, of all people, his house.
Yes, and I was visiting.
And you came to visit, and that evening it just so worked out that I saw you that afternoon, but that evening you were at Young Life, and I asked you out.
You did, and I was not allowed to date because I came from a very strict home, but I was embarrassed to tell you that, so I said yes, and we went on our first date.
And I came to pick you up.
Like a gentleman, and came to the door with flowers, and I lied to my parents and told them that I was going out with one of my friends, so I ran to the car and didn't let you meet my family, and we left. Get in the car,
get in the car, get in the car, get in the car. And I'm like, oh, I have all these flowers. And
I would kill my daughter if she did what we did. And we left for the whole night, and we went to a baseball game and Swenson's. And then I came home and I got grounded for like a whole month.
Yeah.
So.
And then we actually started dating after that.
Dating once I met you.
And we dated till I was almost 21.
5 years.
About 5 years. And then a lot of people know that story that I ended up moving into the music industry, and that was really kind of my focus, and had moved me to Nashville. Eventually you had moved to Nashville.
I moved to Nashville too, yeah. And then we broke up like a month after I moved there.
Perfect timing after doing like 2 years of a long distance relationship.
But I loved it there, so I stayed for like 7 years.
And throughout that time, our paths crossed a little bit.
Tiny bit.
But it wasn't till, oh my gosh, was it like 15 years later?
Yeah, I was like 30. Well, I won't give my age away.
We were in our 30s.
We were in our 30s.
So we were in our 30s, and I had moved back to Ohio. You had already moved back to Ohio years before, and our paths crossed. And
you found me on Facebook.
I think I did. And we started dating again, and long story short, we ended up getting married not terribly long after that. I mean, if God was going to bring us back together after that, we probably shouldn't have waited that long anyway to get married. So then we get married, and this is kind of where I think it's interesting to share our story. And my hope is through this podcast that I know a lot of people have struggled with infertility, with miscarriage. And I know as our story had unfolded, there was a lot of people that kind of came out of the woodwork that we didn't even know that struggled, but really kind of spoke a lot of encouragement and hope into our lives going through that. And now that we're on the other side of that, feel like it's important to share that story because I think a lot of people do struggle in that area.
Definitely.
So when you and I got married, it wasn't long before we realized that there was going to be some issues around us wanting to have kids.
It's funny because I feel like when we first got married, I felt like a ton of pressure to start trying because we were older.
Not young.
Mid-30s. And I think I was more on board with her like starting sooner because I knew I wanted a family. I don't know, maybe I just had an inkling, or maybe it was God speaking to me that it wasn't going to be easy, but I just had a feeling. And so we started trying.
I didn't, had I known what I know now, I think I would have been a little bit more assertive.
Right.
But I was just like, oh, it's going to happen when it,
right.
I remember saying that. It's like, it'll happen when it happens. But looking back now, that was
never happened.
That's not the case. Right. And so I think we found out pretty quickly as we started that process that we were going to have to do more.
Well, we weren't getting pregnant.
And
so I went to the doctor,
yeah.
and they diagnosed me with like a heart-shaped uterus, which is not what I ended up having.
Right.
And put me on fertility meds.
Which was not the good call.
And I got pregnant.
Right.
And then I got pregnant, and we started meeting with my fertility doctor, and she diagnosed me with a bicornuate uterus, which is like a septum in my uterus. But I was pregnant when she diagnosed me.
Yeah.
So she pretty much said, well,
we'll try.
We'll see what happens, but there's a pretty good chance this is not going to survive.
So we went to, where are those Hocking Hills?
Yeah, the worst trip of my life.
And we went to Hocking Hills with your entire family and had a cabin. Had a wonderful time and a really great couple days. It was, I think, the last evening that we were going to be there, and we all just got kind of ready to start watching a movie.
Do you remember what we were watching?
I blacked
Uncle
out.
Buck.
Uncle Buck. I do love that movie. And I just remember you dashing to the bathroom.
I just had a weird feeling that night.
Yeah. And there was... from my recollection,
blood everywhere.
Horrific scream, and your sister bolted into the room, and it was bad. It was just a bad situation. You were bleeding horrifically,
yeah.
And we were in a cabin
in the middle of nowhere
with no cell service, and we could not find where the hospital was. So what we ended up doing is we got everybody who needed to go into the car, and your dad drove to the highest part of the mountains so we could get...
We called the police.
Yeah.
To try to get like them to give us directions to the nearest hospital.
Yep. And we ended up finding a very, very small hospital that was not equipped.
They didn't even have an ultrasound machine.
Right. They were not ready for us. And this was pretty late, you know.
Yeah.
But I remember them taking you in, and really, they weren't really able to do much of anything other than kind of keep you stabilized. I remember walking out in the parking lot and just really in fear, like wrestling with God about this. And I remember seeing your dad out in the parking lot, and he was a mess. It was just really scary, but they were still like in our back of our minds.
I hadn't lost the baby yet at that point.
And we ended up... I think you and I drove straight to our fertility doctor the next morning. I think they opened at like 7:30 or 8. So we left at like 4 a.m, headed towards there. And we got there. They got you right in, did an ultrasound, and it was a new guy, or maybe...
It was not my normal doctor.
Yeah, but wasn't there a guy training?
I don't remember.
There were two guys. One was, I think, was training, and he was doing the ultrasound, and he goes, "Oh, there's the baby." And I was like, oh, we're okay. And then the other doctor goes, but it's not.
Okay.
It's not okay.
There was a huge blood clot in my uterus.
So we ended up going through a miscarriage, and then you ended up having to do a DNC. Mm-hmm. And isn't that when they found?
I think they knew about the septum.
Well, during this time, you can share that what the problem actually was.
Yeah, so I had, it's called bicornate uterus. It's like a piece of cartilage in your uterus, and it would never allow me to fully carry to term a baby. So long story short, they had to go in and remove a bunch of other stuff, fibroids and endometriosis that they found, and kind of prep my body to carry a baby. But I have really horrifyingly bad eggs too, which we found out through all the this too. So now not only do I have this messed up uterus, but I have older lady than I am eggs.
So at that point, our option really was to start looking at IVF. And that's when we started that journey, which was
crazy,
a whole different,
which a lot of people have
done. And we had an amazing doctor, and we went through the beginning stages of IVF. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the typical number is, but I know it's more than what we were able to do. But we ended up only getting five.
And then 5 embryos, 2 didn't survive. So we had 3 viable embryos from...
Yeah. And so when we did the first round, we did one. And that did not take.
They implanted 1, did not take. And then we implanted the 2.
Right.
And we got Lennon.
And so when we implanted the 2, 1 ended up taking. And, at this point, it was, I think you and I both were exhausted. It was a very, very long process to get that final embryo to take. We weren't getting a lot of good news. I mean, you were going to the doctor at least every other day.
In the beginning, yeah.
And a lot of it was not very encouraging. And so we just got used to this. Well, what's going to be the obstacle today? Or what's going to be the bad news today?
It was really hard. And then once my pregnancy started going through, we found out all these other things started happening. 20 weeks in, we found out that she had a heart condition.
Right.
They did a fetal echo because I was IVF and found that.
And the heart condition was she had a hole.
She has a VSD.
Yeah, and in between the 2 chambers, which they could see immediately.
Which she still has and has to get checked every 6 months.
Yeah. So then, just to compound things and to make things even more interesting, it was you were about almost 8 months pregnant at the end of your 7 months, and it was Thanksgiving morning. And I'll never forget, well, I probably forget a lot of it, but I'll never forget the first feeling. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up. You weren't in bed.
No, because I felt horrible.
And I woke up and I could not seem to get my legs to work. And I immediately knew something was wrong and could not even imagine what it was at the moment. But I was able to kind of get my composure, but I was not operating well. But I wanted to find you. And I can't remember exactly. I think you were downstairs. Mm-hmm. And I think I got you, and you were like, I'm not.
Well, I went downstairs early in the morning because I was not feeling well, and I knew something was wrong.
Yeah. And so I got you downstairs. I got to you, and then I think I got you back upstairs.
Yeah, and then I passed out. And
you passed out, and then I got downstairs. Essentially, I was trying to think of the 911.
You couldn't.
And I couldn't think of what those numbers were. Fortunately, I had my phone, and I could see my dad's picture that I must have called him recently. I called my dad, told him something was not good. He got over there. He called 911. I had passed out on the floor. He came in, got both of us up and then out, and we realized we had a carbon monoxide
leak
issue in our house. And you were just about 8 months pregnant. They put us both in different ambulances, took us to the hospital, and I ended up on one side of the hospital. You ended up on the other, and all of these decisions were being made. They wanted to life flight you at one point to Pittsburgh because they didn't have the
hyperbaric chamber or
That's
whatever
right.
that they wanted to put me in.
So it was just it was crazy. It was like,
everything was going wrong.
Everything in my body was like, this child is not going to be born. And it really developed a irrational fear that developed in my mind. And certainly when January came around, and we were so blessed and fortunate that our little daughter ended up being born.
And being fine.
For the most part, the first 24 hours was crazy. I mean, she was had jaundice, and it was the moment we left the hospital, we had to take her right to a heart cardiologist and stuff. For all intents and purposes, she was good, and we were really, really blessed that she was made it. And I don't know that I've really ever talked about this. I really developed, like I was saying before, a fear that this little girl somehow, was just not supposed to make it. And I just had that thought in my head. And during that time, I was getting my final training in EMDR. And when we were getting trained in EMDR, then you have to practice it. And I remember really working through a lot of the trauma that you and I had went through the pregnancy, then the miscarriage. And it was really, really helpful for me. And I remember God giving me an image of our daughter. In my mind, she was probably 7 or 8 running through a field. And it really relieved me that it's like, you know what? I got her. She's going to make it. And that was huge for me. So our daughter was born. And I think at that point, you and I kind of were thinking, we're just going to kind of go with this for a little bit. But It wasn't terribly long after that we were
able to start trying again.
Well, then what happened?
Then then I kind of kept getting pregnant. Mm-hmm. And not happening.
So before COVID, I think, did we get pregnant once before the pandemic, and then twice during the pandemic, and none of those seemed to work. And at that time we weren't doing IVF, but we were doing
fertility meds. So.
But we're doing the fertility meds
and inseminations.
I mean, it just it was such a long process. So we were on that process for the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then I think it was
January.
Almost this time last year that you and I were talking about, you know what? I think we're done.
You said we're done. I did not say we were done.
I was done with
were done. I was not.
The hormones.
You told me it was my last month. And for some reason, my cycle got screwy. And we had to skip December last year because they missed my ovulation. Mm-hmm. And you, in your mind, were still done. And I was like, well, that didn't count. We don't get to be done because we didn't do it. Like, we didn't get to inseminate me. So we did January.
Yeah. And it did not
take.
And I think at that point, maybe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that I was done. You were done.
I didn't know I was done until like a couple months later, but I was done. It was like I had lived half of our marriage on fertility drugs, and
it was too much.
It was too much.
It was too much.
Physically, emotionally, mentally,
financially, all of those things.
It was all too much.
And I remember probably being a little bit too ahead of the game. I had brought up the idea of like, let's start thinking about adoption. And I think you kind of were like, look, I need a minute.
Well, at first I reached out to a friend of ours because I was like, I'm so impulsive. I'm the most impulsive person probably ever. Mm-hmm. And then I'll never forget, and I'm not allowed to say names. Probably not.
You can say names.
There was the church that we go to, they do redemption stories. And the day that I was supposed to meet with one of our pastor's wives to talk about adoption, someone from our church did a redemption story on fertility, and it like broke me. Like, it was just, I couldn't, like, it was, I don't know why. It was, and like, I started thinking, like, this friend of mine now, her redemption story was that she had a horrifyingly terrible struggle with fertility as well, and they ended up like surprisingly getting pregnant, and that's kind of was their redemption. And I think it hit me that like my redemption story was going to be that I was going to have to be okay with not getting pregnant. Because like I just knew that I wasn't going to. And my eggs are old. I'm old now. I'm not even in my 30s anymore. And so it was like, I think I had to like succumb to the fact that like this is just going to be my story, and it's just me and you and Lennon.
Yeah.
And I was okay with that, but it was just like a really hard realization to come to.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, and I think this is important to share, through all of this, you kept saying God was telling you our family wasn't done.
Yeah.
Our family's incomplete. And I was like, you're nuts. Like, this is.
Then I thought maybe I just needed a dog. So at the beginning of COVID, I tried to get you to let me get a dog, and you wouldn't.
Right. So a year ago at this time, in January of last year, we decided to stop the fertility process. We talked about start talking about adoption, but I think you and I both decided that we were going to give it some time and maybe revisit that in September. And you needed some time to mourn the whole process, the infertility, the miscarriages, the just what your body went through, which is beyond me that you were able to do. And so you took, I don't know, it was several months. Maybe it was June of last year. I remember you coming to me and kind of going, you know what, I think I'm okay.
No, I remember coming to you and saying, I think I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Like not just okay, but like, I think this is good. Like Lennon's an amazing kid. We're so blessed with her. She's so great. She's doing really well considering her health conditions. We're doing great. We're kind of at this place where just everything's great. Like,
yeah,
there's no need to throw any wrenches in that. And it's like, I'm happy. I don't need that fulfillment. I'm good.
Right. Which was a huge
thing to come
to. And I think also a huge stressor that we finally released out of our marriage. Sure. And then it wasn't long after that, sometime in August, I remember you coming to me saying, food doesn't taste right. I don't feel well.
We had a birthday party here for one of my best friends.
Right.
And it was kind of one of those, it's COVID now. Should we be doing this? And then like 3 days later, I was like, I don't feel good. I think I got COVID. I don't feel right. Something's not right.
So we got nervous because we were very, very careful throughout the pandemic and continued because of our daughter. But then we thought you had COVID, and it turned out you didn't have COVID.
Nope.
And you ended up going to get a home pregnancy test and took it and threw it in our daughter's backpack and left it.
Looking at it because I knew I was not pregnant.
Right. And I'll never forget that day. I was working from home doing telehealth with clients. And when I do that, I have an office in the basement. And I came walking up the steps and I opened the door and I could see you had your phone out like you were filming me. And then I looked at our daughter who's standing there with a funny look on her face and almost doing like a pirouette with this shirt that she was showing me that it said Big Sister on it. And then I looked back at you and then I looked at her and I did not get it at first. And I think Lennon said, Daddy, I'm going to be a big sister. And then I immediately looked at you and thought, you are a crazy person. What are you doing to our child? And I think you started to get emotional and I'm like, oh my gosh, wait a minute. Are we pregnant?
Yeah.
And so you didn't have COVID.
Nope.
You were pregnant.
I'm pregnant.
Which I remember calling my parents, and we were like, we have a surprise. You need to guess. And after about 10 different things, finally we're like, all right, look, we're pregnant. And my mom said, I would have guessed 10,000 other things.
Right. Never that. Well, I was with my mom when I took the test, and I took it, and then I forgot about it, and I put it in Lennon's backpack, and then when I went to get her lunch or something out of her backpack, I saw it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about this, and then I looked at it, and it said pregnant, and I was like, oh my gosh. I handed it to my mom, and she was like, whose is that? And I was like, well, it's not Lennon's, so... And she's like, it was just crazy.
The amazing thing, too, is when I finally saw that, how many pregnancy tests do you think we have taken? Hundreds, thousands. And never have we seen one so positive.
Yeah.
It was pretty incredible. And so it's just interesting how God works. I think we were trying to really control the process for a long time. Mm-hmm. And we certainly were blessed with our daughter. But never in a million years thought we would get pregnant on our own. And as soon as we let go, and
I think I shared this with our community group, and like part of my testimony is like, I think my biggest struggle with God wasn't until I started going through fertility. I feel like having a baby is the one thing you should be able to do, because it's one of the most important things that you do in the whole entire world, and not just anybody. You should be able to make that decision. And here we are, like, we have a home that would be ready for, like, we have the things that would, and we couldn't do it. And it's just like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I struggled with that with God so hard, because I think I would, be a good mom, or all the things that, like, whatever. And then I don't get to be one, and I don't get to make that choice on my own. Yeah. And that didn't seem fair to me.
So when we had our first daughter, over Thanksgiving, we had a horrible scare of carbon monoxide. Well, this past Thanksgiving, we were all exposed to COVID. And
one of my clients was like, "You're just not meant to be pregnant."
Especially around Thanksgiving
when you're pregnant.
So you and Lennon got COVID over the Thanksgiving weekend. Mm-hmm. And you're doing good now, but it certainly was scary having you being pregnant, and Lennon with her heart, and she's had some lung stuff too with every time she gets sick.
Yeah, she's got a lot of RSV-ish. So
that was a thing that we were navigating this year. And here we are. It's Christmas. We've got 5 months.
4 more months.
4 more months to go. And we were just super blessed. And it's kind of crazy.
I still just don't believe I'm pregnant, even though I can feel her now. And I can definitely see it now.
Yeah, it is. It's overwhelming. And so we share that. And, we've had a lot of opportunity to spend with other couples who have navigated infertility and miscarriages or currently are going through that. And I just know, and I've said this so many times on the podcast, that when you feel like you're all alone and you feel like you're on an island, it's so much harder to go through. And we wanted to end this season of the ExEm podcast with just a really encouraging, hopeful message. And to be honest with you, for us, this whole process has been a miracle. Mm-hmm. And the moment that we had our first daughter, everybody around us just recognized that God really did a miracle and allowing that child to be born and for her to be healthy and for her to grow up the way she's growing. And then all of a sudden we have been blessed to see God's miracle twice through this process. And we still have 4 months to go, and on a little level we white knuckle it. But we're feeling
I feel good about it.
Really good about it. Anything else you want to share?
No, I don't think so.
You did awesome. See?
Thanks.
It was really good. Yeah. I really coaxed her into doing this because I feel like this is a good way for us to kind of bring in season 3 and kind of share this story. And I've gotten a lot of emails and stuff on the ExEm podcast of people being interested in hearing our story. So here you go. Well, sweetheart, thank you very much for being on the podcast, and I love you.
I love you too.
All right.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Well, I would really like to thank my wife for doing that. I know that was very difficult for her, and we've been talking about it for over the last couple of weeks about doing this, and I know that caused her a little bit of anxiety, but I appreciate her being able to do that. And this story that she and I shared is real, and it's something that we went through, and we struggled, and we were hurt, and our marriage was tested many times over, and oftentimes we were really questioning kind of what's God doing here. And our story is certainly not over, but we look back and we can kind of see from a much better perspective now of how God was moving, even in moments where we felt like maybe he wasn't hearing us or knowing what we needed at the time. And I think a lot of times that's why our story is so important, because it's the adversities of life, it's the difficulties that really shape who we become. And this was a part of our journey that I don't think either of us really saw coming. I'm thankful for it. God certainly has blessed us through this process, but that doesn't mean it wasn't hard, it wasn't difficult, and we we certainly experienced a lot of loss. So I hope you got something from this episode, and we just thank you for an amazing season 2, and can't believe we just wrapped up the second season of the Experience Emerge podcast, and we're really looking forward to what's to come in 2022 and season 3. Well, until next time, or when our Savior comes, God bless.